5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Right, stop, 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 stop.
Kidnap was a lottery that we ran in 1998. You would buy a ticket, and by buying a ticket, you would be entered into a draw, and the winners of the draw would be kidnapped on a certain date in the summer of 1998. So we had a draw in Manchester. 10 people were pulled from the hat, and they were then put under surveillance for 2 weeks. And at the end of those 2 weeks, they'd each receive a photograph of themselves in a brown envelope through the post that would indicate to them that they were in the shortlist.
Once we had shortlisted 10 people, Jamie Idden, who was a member of Blast Theory, there were 4 artists in Blast Theory at the time, and I spent 2 weeks driving around England in a scout van, staking people out and taking photos of them for the final bits of surveillance that we did on our 2 winners, one in London and one in Southend. Deborah, when we went to surveil her before we kidnapped her, she was not at home. With about 24 hours to go, we realised that we potentially were in trouble, and so we then rang her next of kin and said, will you keep this secret, but we really need to know where Deborah is. And her next of kin was like, oh, Deborah's so excited about this. Yeah, I'll tell you where she is. She's house sitting for someone else. And so in the end, her next of kin said, I can arrange to meet Deborah in a pub, and you can do it there. And so suddenly, with 24 hours to go, we chose a pub, staked that pub out, found the back exit, found an alley where we could park the van, planned the kidnap there. Russell, he went to a nightclub the night before, and the surveillance team got too close to him, and he spotted them. And then from that point on, he knew he was about to be kidnapped. So he led the surveillance team on a chase around Southend at 3 o'clock in the morning, then went home and fell asleep. We, as the main team, then turned up at 8 in the morning to kidnap him, being followed by a Channel 4 documentary crew. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited. And then we started to ring, and no one answered the phone. And then we started to panic because it had been 5 or 6 hours. Someone called the police, and we had to diffuse the situation with the police. They left. We went to Russell's work, and we asked one of the people who worked with him whether she would come back to his house and trick him to come out. Knocked on his door and said, oh, Russell, come quick, get in the car, we can give them the slip. And as he came out, we then blocked the car in and kidnapped him. Took them to a secret location and held them there for the next 48 hours or so. Then drove them a couple of hours to the release at the ICA in London, where there was a press conference. And we were so anxious about getting them at all, being able to kidnap them at all, without getting arrested, without hurting them, finding them, keeping them in the right place at the right time that we could kidnap them, that we honestly thought, once you've got them in the box, easy, job done, job's a good one. But in reality, there was a whole bunch of things to sort out.
I think the thing that's striking is suddenly you're in the same position as the kidnappees, where they have nothing that they can do because they're locked in a room with nothing to do. But you're also making sure that they're okay. So you spend the time peering through the window, checking the video cameras recording, listening to the microphones.
When they needed to eat, suddenly that became really, really complex. And it's like, what do we do there? We're like, we haven't thought through the feeding, the eating sort of business. And so basically each person, I think, had a feeder, put the food towards the mouth, take a bite, chew, 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 wait to see if they swallow it. Okay, is that a good amount of time? Yeah, okay, let's do another mouthful. And that was like, everything became like magnified. Suddenly feeding and eating was like the strangest thing in the world. There was a psychologist watching them. There was a camera streaming to the internet where you could pan and tilt the camera so that people could look around inside the room. There was a chat window where people could ask the kidnappers questions, and a lot of that was trying to provoke us to say stuff. I think it was that year that the lottery became available in the UK. And so for us, it seemed like a good method or device to go. You pay for the price of your ticket and you have the chance to do something that really puts your head on around another way.
There was a kind of hysteria in the country around lottery winning and taking part. We wanted to heighten that and to play ironically with the idea of what you have won is something that ostensibly is a kind of negative thing.
So the design of the application form was a folded piece of A3, which came together into like an A6 booklet. And on one page was a list of options that you could also include when you bought your ticket. But you could also make special requests for things that you would like to happen. And they included things like having a piece of music played, or having the kidnappers dressed in underwear was one option. Having only handsome or pretty kidnappers was another option, which was essentially the same kidnappers as us. Within the registration form, you could also describe your fantasy kidnap and what kind of kidnapping might mean to you and what your ideal experience would be. The one that really stood out to me was one about being kidnapped by dolphins. Do you remember that one? No? Oh, that was...
Is that yours?
I feel like I didn't make that up.
Russell had paid for Nowhere to Run by Martha and the Vandellas. He'd paid extra on the off chance that he was going to be picked. People who paid extra for those sorts of things, it's like quite a big gamble. I think the most expensive entrant paid £80 for the £10 entry plus £70 worth of extras on top and paid that to us. So, you know, by rights, he should have been really delighted that he was finally getting some relief from the kidnap. But I think we were too tempted by the kind of surrealism of the kidnappers dancing for him. And it wasn't intended to be kind of rubbing his face in it, but I think it felt a bit like that when it came to it. The members of the public who entered are taking an enormous risk. They're buying a ticket for something run by they don't know who, and they're trusting that we're going to treat them with respect and treat them ethically and give them an experience that they've paid for. We are strangers to one another, and then suddenly you're in the back of a van with the hand on someone, they've got a hood over their head, and I can feel Russell's heart beating 1,000 miles a minute because we have literally just pulled him out of a car and grabbed him. That exact moment where someone I've never met before in my life essentially put their life in my hands, that feels like an essential thing in so much of the work that we make, and Kidnap is like the apex of that kind of risk. There's risks on both sides, and that is the kind of cement that sits at the heart of that work. We were putting ourselves at risk. The police turned up on more than one occasion. We had all of the legal negotiations. We spent over a year working with Harbottle and Lewis, who are an extremely fancy set of London lawyers, to try and sort out the legal aspects of it. And there is a large chunk of small print on that registration form, which reflects all of the ways in which we tried to frame what we were doing to ensure that it would be within the law. But their advice was no amount of small print could actually get us out of the fact that we were asking someone to pay us to then come and kidnap them. Kidnapping is inherently a crime, and so we did have quite a lot of fear about the legal side.
We knew if the company was going down, that would be the project that took us out.
From my point of view, the first starting point is the Spanner trial in the late 1980s, where a group of gay men who filmed themselves having sadomasochistic sessions, those tapes fell into the hands of the police, and the police investigated them, convicted them, and sent 4 of them to prison. The judge ruled that the fact that they were consenting was no defence. It was a significant shift in the law because suddenly the state had the power to intervene even if individuals had consented to those acts. So that has a direct relationship to kidnap because people are consenting to being kidnapped, but our legal advice was, following the Spanner trial, consent is not a defence. So the fact that Russell and Deborah have both consented to be kidnapped does not mean that a crime hasn't taken place, and the police and the judiciary may well take the view that this is a criminal act in any case, and you could be convicted as kidnappers despite the defence of consent. I believe that we might get arrested and we might end up in court, but we would fight it and we would win.
We decided that the press and the media was a big part of it, and so we decided that we needed a PR agency, and we, I think, dropped an email to Mark Bukowski.
No. A fax.
A fax, oh my God. We dropped a fax to Mark Bukowski PR agency from Berlin saying, we are going to kidnap 2 people, will you represent the project? Yeah.
We had a challenge, which is that the kidnapping had to be done very discreetly, and we then needed to keep them at a secret location. So our question was, how are we going to actually make this work available? How are we going to open this work up? And it was obvious to us that we would use the press as part of that. And we ourselves were interested in how the press fabricate and juice up things like kidnap.
We drove the kidnappees to the press conference at the ICA for a couple of hours, and we'd invited most of the major broadsheets and tabloids and radio stations, and we went into the theatre and they asked a series of questions. They asked them anything really that they wanted to ask them. The press were doing all of those things that you see on TV. It's like, look over here, stand here, can you stand here? As the kidnappers, can you stand with your arms around the shoulders, dominating the kidnappees above them? We were really protective of the kidnappees. We were like, actually we had a lot of care and duty of care to these people. We were like, no, we're not going to be, look, here is our prize, here is our victim. It was like, no, actually right now we've got to make sure that these people are okay. We've got to make sure that they're coming out of this experience and we're not going to psychologically damage them, that the off-ramp of this experience is going to be manageable for them into the future.
It was a strange dynamic because the press wanted a story, and the two stories they were going after was a bunch of sick artists do something to poor innocent people, or a pair of perverts sign up for something that they should never have signed up for. So their questions are leading more and more, pushing to try and get that out of any of us. And what actually happened was this incredible sense of communal purpose between the 3 of us and Russell and Deborah, who we had kidnapped. We all felt unified in the face of this kind of tabloid needling where they were trying to get those stories out of us. And we got more and more unified as that press conference went on.
I really hadn't thought about what it would mean. When you poked the straw through the wall and said, this is how you're going to drink for the next 2 days, I thought, oh God, what happens when I need to go to the toilet? Are they going to bring in a bucket? And I thought, if they do that, I'm just going. Although I felt really nervous every time you came in. It wasn't nervous because I feared for my safety or I feared that you'd do something or anything like that. It was just a sort of scary sort of situation. Yeah.
Mark Bukowski PR could handle a story and deal with the press for us. We knew there'd be controversy around it and protests against Kidnap that was also handled through the press. For Kidnap, there were audiences everywhere. There were audiences who were following it because it's an art event. There were audiences who were coming and watching it because it's something weird online. It was the first time we'd worked online. There were audiences who were reading about it in the press and are processing it through that frame. There were audiences who will literally witness one of the 2 kidnaps on the street and think, what did I just see? So there are all these kind of multiple onion skin layers of audience, and the real event that sits at the heart of that is why they're all paying attention to it.
It was a kind of project where we realised that we were making something which sat outside of a physical space. We weren't making work for black box theatres. We were making a piece of work which was going to live outside in the culture, or in the bigger kind of culture around it. And that was the place where people would engage with it, they would find it, and that's where the conversation would be about it. And I think the internet was one of those places that we could do that.
We're thinking a bit about the internet and how the internet provides a new way of accessing a piece of work like that. It's the first time that we worked with video streaming. We're also thinking about how the real event is also a kind of media event, and is also sort of layered on with a whole bunch of sort of fictional understandings of kidnapping. And so this sort of sense of like, what is this? Is this a stunt? Is this a happening? Is this a performance? Is this an event? Is this a service? Is this a prank? That those questions are all rich and energize the work, that people's uncertainty about what it was a big part of it. It wasn't advertised as an artwork, and we did not advertise ourselves as artists in any of the ways in which we talked about or publicized Kidnap. We wanted people to make their own conclusions about what it was that they were looking at. We've always been fascinated in that idea that when you believe in something hard enough or pretend it hard enough, it becomes essentially indistinguishable from the real, and that reality is a much more malleable substance than is traditionally made out. Even in our very first show, Gunmen Kill 3, we were interested in the idea of a live event or a real event, and what's the difference between something that is staged and something that is real. We started working on a performance called Succumbing, where we were interested in why people give up control, why we do that in a society where supposedly we all really prize our own agency and choice and destiny, but actually in loads of places we clearly are happy to hand control to other people or to other things. And we got completely stuck with that performance. We worked on it for months and months, but we could not get past the contradiction of a performance setting where an audience gives over control to the performers in front of them, and what that meant for the power dynamic in a performance. And at some point where we were completely blocked, we had the idea of kidnapping people, of that being the purest moment of giving over control, and the idea that if the public would willingly put themselves in a situation where they were prepared to be kidnapped by us, it is the ultimate form of an audience handing over control to the performer.
Anything else, Nick?
So are we going to reveal where the safe house was? Is that?
There's no harm in that, is there?
Yeah.
The safe house was actually at the ICA. And so when the two kidnappees, Deborah and Russell, were released to a press conference at the end of the project, which was also happened to be at the ICA in the Cinematheque, we actually drove them for an hour out of town and then got to a roundabout and turned back and drove back to give the impression that they were being held somewhere remote from London, where in fact they'd been held probably about 20 metres away upstairs in one of the back rooms of the ICA.
I can't remember who gave us permission.
Who was the great guy who was the head of the sort of new media thing? He got us the webcam as well, didn't he?
Justin? No.
What's he called? He wasn't called Justin. He was lovely though.
Oh God, I should remember.
Yeah, he was really, really nice. And he was like, I think Hitachi or whoever will lend us a camera for the internet.
But did he give us
with
permission to be in there?
Yeah. And then later on he was like, we could probably clear that office and you could use that office. And it was tiny, like the room that we had.
It was only slightly bigger than 8 foot
By 8 foot.
Because the box just fitted inside the room.
It was like a sort of meeting room or something.
It still had shelves with sort of files on the walls and stuff, didn't it?
Yeah, it was the ICA.
I want to have a drink, I want to have a shower, I want to have a really nice hot meal. And I'd like rampant sex for about 5 hours.
Got the energy for that?
Yeah, I reckon I could summon it from somewhere.